Something wasn't right. Alexandra Fleming felt it in her bones as she stared at the wilting orchid on her kitchen windowsill. The delicate purple petals drooped despite her meticulous care, just like her marriage was withering despite her best efforts. She absently ran her fingers through her chestnut hair, highlighted with honey-colored strands that caught the morning sunlight streaming through the window. The strange feeling that had been haunting her for weeks intensified as she heard the shower running upstairs. Charles was getting ready for work, just like any other Tuesday morning. But lately, everything felt different. Alexandra and Charles Fleming had been married for 11 years. They lived in a charming two-story house with a garden that was the envy of the neighborhood, thanks to Alexandra's expertise as a botanist. At 39, she had built a respectable career at the Botanical Research Center, specializing in plant biochemistry. Charles, at 42, was a successful investment banker whose ambition had served them well financially. From the outside, they were the picture of suburban success, the kind of couple others aspired to be. But beneath the polished surface, hairline fractures had begun to appear. It started with small things Alexandra couldn't quite name. The way Charles's phone would suddenly go silent when she entered the room. How he'd begun working late more frequently in the past 3 months. The sudden interest in his appearance, new clothes, a different cologne, more time at the gym. None of these things were damning on their own, but together they formed a constellation of doubt in Alexandra's mind. "Hey, I'm heading out," Charles called as he descended the stairs, adjusting the cufflinks on his tailored shirt. His dark hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place. Alexandra turned from the window, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her hazel eyes. "Do you want some coffee before you go?" "No time," he replied, grabbing his briefcase from beside the door. "I've got that meeting with the investors from Chicago today, remember? Might be a late one." Chicago. Another business trip that had appeared on his calendar with suspicious suddenness. "Right," she nodded, trying to keep her voice neutral. "The Chicago meeting." Charles paused, his hand on the doorknob. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," Alexandra said quickly. "Just confirming I heard you correctly." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You've got that tone again." "What tone?" "That accusatory tone." Charles set his briefcase down with deliberate slowness. "What's going on, Alex? Just say whatever it is you're thinking." Alexandra hesitated. She'd tried to broach the subject before, and it never ended well. But the gnawing feeling in her stomach wouldn't let her stay silent. "It's just, you've been distant lately. All these late nights, sudden meetings, business trips." She trailed off, seeing his expression harden. "Not this again." Charles sighed, running a hand over his face. "I thought we were past this." "We never actually talked about it," Alexandra pointed out. "You just dismissed my concerns last time." "Because they're baseless." His voice rose slightly. "I'm working hard, Alex. The Sanders account is huge. You know how important it is for my career. This paranoia has to stop." The word stung. Paranoia. As if her intuition was nothing more than irrational fear. "I'm not paranoid," she said quietly. "Something feels different between us, and I can't ignore it." Charles's expression softened, but in a way that felt rehearsed rather than genuine. He crossed the kitchen and placed his hands on her shoulders. "Nothing is different," he assured her, his voice smooth as silk, "except that I'm under tremendous pressure at work. And honestly, it doesn't help coming home to accusations." Alexandra felt a familiar wave of guilt. Was she being unfair? Creating problems where none existed? Charles had always been ambitious, driven. Maybe this was simply a particularly demanding period in his career. "I'm sorry," she found herself saying. "I don't want to add to your stress." His smile was immediate, victorious. "Thank you." He leaned in to kiss her cheek, and she caught a whiff of his cologne. Expensive, subtle, completely unlike the scent he'd worn for years. Another small change. "I'll try not to be too late," he promised, retrieving his briefcase and heading for the door. "Love you." The door closed behind him before she could respond. Alexandra stood in the kitchen, surrounded by the morning silence, feeling somehow both relieved and troubled by the interaction. Was she really becoming paranoid? Creating problems where none existed? She turned back to the orchid, gently touching one of its wilting petals. Plants didn't lie. When something was wrong, insufficient light, improper watering, poor soil conditions, they showed it. People were more complicated. They could hide, deflect, convince you that what you were seeing wasn't real. Alexandra sighed and glanced at the clock. She needed to get ready for work herself. As she headed upstairs, her phone buzzed with a text. A message from Frank, Charles's best friend since college. They'd known each other for over 20 years, long before Alexandra had entered the picture. "Hey, Alex, any chance we could grab coffee this week? There's something I need to talk to you about." Alexandra frowned at the unusual request. In all the years she'd known Frank, he'd never asked to meet with her alone. He was Charles's friend primarily, though they'd developed a cordial relationship over the years. What could he possibly want to discuss with her specifically? Her thumbs hovered over the screen as she considered her response. Eventually, she typed, "Sure, Frank. When were you thinking?" His reply came almost immediately. "Tomorrow afternoon? 3 o'clock at Riverside Cafe? I'll be there," she responded, a strange sense of foreboding settling in her chest. That evening, Charles arrived home just after 9, loosening his tie as he walked through the door. Alexandra was curled up on the couch with a book on plant pathology, though her mind had been too preoccupied to absorb much of the content. "How was the meeting?" she asked, marking her place and setting the book aside. "Productive," Charles replied vaguely. "We're making progress with the investors. How was your day?" "Fine," Alexandra said, then added casually, "I heard from Frank today. We're meeting for coffee tomorrow." Something flickered across Charles's face. So quickly she almost missed it. Surprise? Concern? But his expression smoothed over immediately. "Oh? What's that about?" He didn't say. Just that he wanted to talk about something. Charles shrugged, but his nonchalance seemed forced. Probably wants advice on Susan's birthday gift or something. Susan was Frank's girlfriend of 3 years. Alexandra nodded, though she suspected it wasn't about a birthday gift at all. Charles disappeared upstairs to shower, and Alexandra found herself checking his suit jacket pockets while he was gone, something she'd never done before and felt immediately ashamed of. She found nothing incriminating, just as she'd found nothing when she'd glanced at his phone the week before, when he'd left it unlocked on the counter. No suspicious texts, no questionable email notifications. Charles was either innocent or very, very careful. That night, as they lay in bed with what felt like an ocean between them, Alexandra stared at the ceiling and wondered if she was losing her mind. All evidence suggested Charles was telling the truth, working hard, stressed about a major client, nothing more. Yet something deep inside her, some primal instinct, continued to sound an alarm she couldn't silence. The next afternoon, Alexandra found herself sitting at a corner table in Riverside Cafe, nursing a cup of chamomile tea and watching the door. Her stomach was tied in knots, though she couldn't articulate exactly why. Frank arrived precisely at 3, ordered a black coffee, and sat across from her with an uncharacteristically serious expression. "Thanks for meeting me, Alex," he said, fidgeting with his coffee cup. "I've been going back and forth about whether to have this conversation." Alexandra felt her heart rate quicken. "What's going on, Frank?" He looked at her directly, his usually cheerful face grave. "It's about Charles." And in that moment, before Frank said another word, Alexandra knew. Her intuition had been right all along. "There's no easy way to say this," Frank continued, his voice low. "But he's not being honest with you, and I can't stand by and watch it happen anymore." Alexandra's hands tightened around her teacup as the world seemed to tilt beneath her. The truth was coming, and despite having suspected it for months, she realized she wasn't ready for it at all. "How long have you known?" Alexandra asked, her voice barely audible over the ambient chatter of the cafe. The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Frank stared into his coffee, unable to meet her eyes. I suspected something was off about 2 months ago, but I only knew for certain last week. Alexandra took a deep breath, steeling herself. Tell me everything. Charles has been seeing someone, Frank said, his words careful and measured. Her name is Tiffany Andrews. She's 28, works at the marketing firm that handles some of your husband's company accounts. That's how they met. The name struck Alexandra like a physical blow. Tiffany Andrews. She now had a name for the shadow that had been hovering at the edges of her marriage. How serious is it? She asked, surprising herself with how calm she sounded despite the storm raging inside her. Frank shifted uncomfortably. I'm not sure about that part, but it's been going on for at least 3 months. 3 months. Alexandra mentally retraced the timeline. That would explain the subtle shifts in Charles's behavior she'd first noticed in early spring. The late nights that had gradually become more frequent. The business trips that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. Those Chicago trips, she said softly. They're not real, are they? Frank shook his head. No, he doesn't go to Chicago. Charles told me he rents a hotel room downtown. Says it's easier than trying to sneak around. Each revelation was like another crack in the foundation of her life, but Alexandra needed to know everything. Do you have proof? She asked, hating how the question made her sound, but needing something concrete to confront Charles with. Something he couldn't dismiss or explain away. Frank hesitated, then reached for his phone. I didn't want to show you this, but you deserve to know the truth. He scrolled through his gallery and then turned the screen toward her. I took this last Friday night. I was meeting a client at the Westbrook Hotel for drinks, and I saw them in the restaurant. Alexandra stared at the photo, her world collapsing around her. There was Charles, her husband of 11 years, with his arm around a young woman with platinum blonde hair and bright red lipstick. They were seated at a corner table, leaning into each other intimately. The woman, Tiffany, was looking up at Charles with adoration, while he gazed back at her with unmistakable desire. It was the way he used to look at Alexandra years ago. He saw me, Frank continued, across the restaurant. I've never seen anyone look so terrified. He came to my place the next morning, begging me not to tell you. Said it was just a fling, that it didn't mean anything. And you didn't believe him, Alexandra said, finally tearing her eyes away from the damning image. No, Frank replied firmly. I've known Charles for 23 years. He's my oldest friend. But what he's doing to you isn't right. You deserve better, Alex. Alexandra handed the phone back, her fingers trembling slightly. Thank you for telling me. I know it couldn't have been easy. If he asks, I'll deny everything, Frank warned. I can't have him know it was me. But I couldn't keep silent anymore. Not when I saw what it was doing to you. Alexandra nodded, understanding the precarious position Frank had placed himself in. I won't mention your name. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of the revelation settling around them. Alexandra felt strangely numb, as if her emotions had short-circuited from the overload. What will you do now? Frank finally asked. Alexandra took a slow sip of her tea, which had grown cold. I don't know yet, but whatever it is, I'll do it on my terms. As they parted ways outside the cafe, Frank gave her an awkward, sympathetic pat on the shoulder. I'm sorry, Alex, for all of it. She managed a tight smile. Don't be. The truth hurts, but living a lie is worse. Alexandra drove home in a fog, barely registering the familiar streets and houses that lined her route. By the time she pulled into her driveway, a strange calm had settled over her. The suspicion and uncertainty that had plagued her for months had been replaced by cold, hard knowledge. There was a strange relief in that, in finally knowing she wasn't crazy, that her intuition had been right all along. The house was empty when she entered, which was a blessing. She needed time to think, to plan her next move. Charles wouldn't be home until late. Another Chicago meeting that was actually a rendezvous with Tiffany Andrews. Alexandra wandered through the rooms that she had so lovingly decorated over the years, seeing them now through new eyes. The framed wedding photo on the mantel, the vacation souvenirs they'd collected together, the garden visible through the back windows that she had cultivated with such care. How much of it had been real? How much had been a facade? She found herself in Charles's office, a space she rarely entered out of respect for his privacy. Now, she felt no such compunction. She sat at his desk and methodically began going through the drawers, searching for any additional evidence of his betrayal. In the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of file folders, she found a small box from an upscale jewelry store. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet with a heart-shaped charm. The receipt was still tucked into the box, dated 2 weeks ago, for nearly $800. It certainly wasn't meant for her. Charles hadn't given her jewelry in years. Alexandra closed the box and returned it exactly where she'd found it, a plan beginning to form in her mind. Charles had been so careful, so meticulous in covering his tracks. He'd made her feel paranoid, irrational, even crazy for suspecting something was wrong. Now it was her turn to be careful, to be calculating. She spent the next hour in her garden, finding solace among the plants that had never betrayed her. As she trimmed her roses and pulled weeds, her thoughts clarified. By the time she heard Charles's car in the driveway, she knew exactly what she was going to do. "Hey!" he called as he entered through the back door, finding her washing soil from her hands at the kitchen sink. "You're up late." "Just finishing some gardening," she replied, her voice perfectly neutral. "How was your meeting?" "Productive," he said, setting his briefcase down. "We're making real progress with the Chicago investors." The lie rolled off his tongue so effortlessly that Alexandra almost admired his skill. Almost. "That's good," she replied. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something." A flicker of wariness crossed his face. "Oh? I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," Alexandra began, drying her hands on a kitchen towel. "About me being paranoid." Charles's posture relaxed slightly. "And? You were right," she said, forcing a small apologetic smile. "I've been letting my imagination run wild, creating problems that don't exist." The relief on his face was palpable. "I'm glad you can see that, Alex. I've only ever been focused on my work, on building our future. I know that now," she nodded. "And to prove it, I think you should go on that camping trip you've been talking about, the one with the guys from work." Charles blinked, clearly surprised by the suggestion. "Really? You've been so against it." "That was the old paranoid me," Alexandra said with a dismissive wave. "The new me thinks you deserve some time to unwind. When is it again? This weekend?" "Yeah, Friday through Sunday," Charles confirmed, still looking slightly bewildered by her change of heart. "Perfect. You should go. I insist." Later that night, as Charles slept peacefully beside her, Alexandra stared at the ceiling, wide awake. Her mind was racing, calculating, planning. The camping trip provided the perfect opportunity for what she had in mind. The next morning, she called in sick to work, something she rarely did. After Charles left for the office, she drove to the large gardening supply store on the outskirts of town. As one of their most knowledgeable customers, the staff greeted her by name. "Alexandra, what brings you in today?" "We just got those Japanese maple saplings you were asking about," said Ted, the elderly owner who had become something of a mentor to her over the years. "Not today, Ted," she smiled. "I'm actually looking for something specific for an experiment I'm conducting." She explained what she needed, careful to frame it in terms of her botanical research. Ted directed her to a special section of organic compounds, where she found exactly what she was looking for: natural antitractants, specifically formulated with pheromones that worker ants found irresistible. "Fascinating research you're doing," Ted commented as he rang up her purchase. "Never thought about using these compounds for plant protection." "It's all about finding natural solutions," Alexandra replied smoothly. "Chemical pesticides do more harm than good in the long run." That evening, she carefully packed Charles's camping gear while he was still at work. Into his sleeping bag and clothing, she discreetly applied the colorless, odorless ant attractant. Not enough to be immediately noticeable, but sufficient to draw any foraging ants in the vicinity once he was settled at the campsite. When Charles arrived home, she had dinner waiting. His favorite, grilled steak with roasted potatoes. She poured him a generous glass of the expensive Cabernet he preferred. "What's all this for?" he asked, clearly pleased by the special treatment. "Just wanted to send you off on your trip with a nice meal," she replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "and to apologize again for being so difficult lately." Charles raised his glass in a toast. "To understanding wives." Alexandra clinked her glass against his. "To getting exactly what we deserve." Friday morning arrived, and Charles loaded his gear into his SUV. Alexandra stood in the driveway, playing the role of supportive wife to perfection. "Have a great time," she said, giving him a quick kiss. "Don't worry about me. I'll keep busy with the garden." "I'll be back Sunday evening," he promised. "Try not to overthink things while I'm gone." She watched him drive away, maintaining her smile until his car disappeared around the corner. Only then did she allow her expression to harden, determination settling in her eyes. Phase 1 of her plan was complete. Now, she just had to wait. Saturday afternoon, Alexandra's phone rang. Charles's name flashed on the screen, and she answered with feigned cheerfulness. "Hey, how's the camping trip going?" His voice came through strained and irritable. "Terrible. I've been up all night." "What happened?" she asked, infusing her tone with just the right amount of concern. "Ants," Charles hissed. "Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They were everywhere. In my sleeping bag, my clothes, my food. I've got bites all over my body." Alexandra moved to her garden window, gazing out at her perfectly maintained roses as she replied, "That's awful. Did anyone else have the same problem?" There was a telling pause on the line. "No," he finally admitted. "Just me. Must have set up my tent near a colony or something." "Are you coming home early?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "No," Charles said quickly. "We're going to move to a different spot. Should be fine." Alexandra nodded to herself. Of course he wouldn't come home, because he wasn't actually camping with coworkers. The camping trip was just cover for a weekend with Tiffany. "Well, be careful," she said. "Maybe check the ground better this time." "Yeah," he replied distractedly. "Listen, I've got to go. We're packing up now." "Okay, love you," Alexandra said, testing him. Another pause. "You too. Bye." The line went dead. Alexandra set her phone down, a small, satisfied smile playing at her lips. Phase 2 of her plan was working perfectly. The ant attractant had done its job, making Charles miserable without revealing her hand. Now, for Phase 3. Alexandra spent the rest of Saturday preparing. She visited the bank and withdrew a significant sum from their joint savings account. Not everything, but enough to give her a financial cushion. She called a lawyer friend for a recommendation and scheduled a consultation for Monday morning. She began sorting through her personal belongings, mentally cataloging what was truly important to her. By Sunday afternoon, she was ready. The house was spotless, dinner was in the oven, and Alexandra was dressed in one of her most flattering outfits, a deep emerald blouse that brought out the green in her hazel eyes, paired with well-fitted black pants. Her chestnut hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders. If this was to be the final act of her marriage, she would face it, looking her best. Charles's SUV pulled into the driveway just after 6. Through the kitchen window, Alexandra watched him retrieve his camping gear, noting how he moved stiffly, no doubt from the countless ant bites covering his skin. She turned back to the stove, stirring the beef bourguignon that had been simmering for hours. The back door opened, and Charles entered, dropping his bags with a heavy thud. "Welcome home," Alexandra called, without turning around. "Dinner's almost ready." "I need a shower first," he grumbled, already heading for the stairs. "You wouldn't believe the weekend I've had." "Take your time," she replied evenly. "Food will be waiting when you're done." 20 minutes later, Charles descended the stairs in fresh clothes, his hair still damp from the shower. Alexandra had set the dining room table with their good china and lit candles, another detail for her performance. "This looks nice," he commented, taking his usual seat. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion," Alexandra smiled, bringing the pot to the table and serving him generously. "Just happy to have you home." Charles looked at her suspiciously for a moment before turning his attention to the food. They ate in relative silence, Charles occasionally scratching at the red welts visible on his neck and wrists. "Those bites look painful," Alexandra observed. "Maybe you should see a doctor." "They're just ant bites," he dismissed. "They'll go away." "So," she said casually, refilling his wine glass, "how was the rest of the camping trip? After the ant situation, I mean." Charles launched into an elaborate story about fishing, hiking, and campfire conversations with his co-workers. Alexandra listened attentively, nodding at all the right moments, all while knowing every word was a fabrication. "Sounds wonderful," she said when he finished, "despite the ants." "It was good to get away," he agreed, relaxing as he believed his lies were being accepted without question. "Though I missed sleeping in our bed," Alexandra smiled thinly. "I'm sure you did." She began clearing the dishes, bringing them to the kitchen while Charles remained at the table finishing his wine. When she returned, she was holding her phone. "By the way," she said, her voice suddenly losing its warmth, "I was wondering if Tiffany got bitten by the ants too." Charles froze, his wine glass halfway to his lips. "What did you say?" "Tiffany Andrews," Alexandra clarified, her eyes locked on his. "Your 28-year-old girlfriend. Did she get bitten by the ants too? Or was she spared since only your clothes and sleeping bag were treated with the ant attractant?" The color drained from Charles's face. "Alex, I don't know what you're talking about. Who is Tiffany?" Alexandra unlocked her phone and turned the screen toward him. It displayed the photo Frank had shown her at the cafe. Charles and Tiffany at the Westbrook Hotel, intimately close. "Don't insult my intelligence by lying anymore, Charles," he said quietly. "I know everything." He stared at the photo, his expression cycling rapidly through shock, anger, and calculation. "Where did you get that?" "Does it matter?" Alexandra asked. "The point is, I have it, along with the receipt for the $800 gold bracelet you bought her 2 weeks ago. The one hidden in your office drawer." Charles set his glass down carefully, his mind visibly racing for a way out. "Alex, this isn't what it looks like. She's just a colleague. We were discussing—" "Stop!" Alexandra cut him off, her voice sharp as a blade. "For months, you've made me question my own sanity. You called me paranoid, crazy. You gaslit me into believing I was imagining things when my intuition was screaming that something was wrong. No more lies." Charles's expression hardened. "You went through my office? You put something on my clothes? What the hell is wrong with you?" "What's wrong with me?" Alexandra repeated incredulously. "You've been cheating on me for months, lying to my face every day, making me feel like I was losing my mind. And you have the audacity to ask what's wrong with me?" "It was just a fling," Charles insisted, changing tactics. "It didn't mean anything." "She doesn't mean anything." Alexandra laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "Is that supposed to make me feel better? That you were willing to destroy our 11-year marriage for something that didn't mean anything?" "I wasn't going to leave you," Charles said, reaching for her hand across the table. "It was just a distraction, a mistake. We can work through this, Alex. People overcome affairs all the time." Alexandra pulled her hand away. "The affair isn't why I'm leaving you, Charles." He blinked, clearly caught off guard. "What?" "I could have forgiven an affair," she continued calmly. "People make mistakes. Relationships get complicated. But what I can't forgive is how you manipulated me, how you deliberately made me doubt my own perception of reality, how you looked me in the eyes day after day, and convinced me I was being irrational when I was absolutely right." Charles's expression darkened. "You're overreacting. I never said you were crazy." "Your exact words were, 'You're going crazy,'" Alexandra countered. Tuesday morning in our kitchen, when I tried to talk to you about my concerns, you said I was paranoid, that my suspicions were baseless. I was trying to protect our marriage, Charles argued, his voice rising. What was I supposed to do? Admit everything at the first sign of your suspicion? You were supposed to be honest, Alexandra shot back, her composure finally cracking. Or better yet, you were supposed to be faithful to the vows you made to me. But if you couldn't do either of those things, you should have at least had the decency not to make me question my own sanity. They stared at each other across the table, the candles flickering between them, casting shadows that danced across their faces. In that moment, Alexandra saw Charles clearly for perhaps the first time. Not as the charming, ambitious man she'd fallen in love with, but as someone capable of profound deception and emotional cruelty. "What happens now?" Charles finally asked, his voice quieter. "I'm leaving," Alexandra said simply. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'm meeting with her tomorrow morning to start divorce proceedings." Charles's eyes widened. "You can't be serious. Alex, we can fix this. We can go to counseling. I'll end things with Tiffany. I'll do whatever it takes." "It's too late," she replied, standing up from the table. "I've packed what matters to me. I'll be staying at a hotel until I find a place of my own." "This is our home," Charles protested, gesturing around them. "You can't just walk away from everything we've built together." "Watch me," Alexandra said, moving toward the stairs where her suitcases waited. "And Charles, you might want to see a doctor about those ant bites. I used a particularly potent attractant. The itching could last for weeks." Charles followed her up the stairs, his earlier contrition giving way to anger. "You deliberately set me up. You knew I wasn't camping. You wanted me to suffer." Alexandra continued methodically retrieving her prepared luggage. "Yes, I did. Consider it a parting gift, a small taste of the discomfort you've caused me for months." "You won't get away with this," Charles threatened, his voice low. "I'll fight you for everything. The house, the savings, all of it." Alexandra turned to face him, surprisingly calm in the face of his rage. "Go ahead. But before you do, you should know that I have copies of all your communications with Tiffany, the ones you thought you'd deleted from your cloud backup. My friend at the IT department was very helpful. It was a bluff. She had no such evidence, but the flicker of panic in Charles's eyes told her she'd hit the mark. There were communications he didn't want revealed. "You're bluffing," he said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Am I?" Alexandra challenged. "You thought I was just a paranoid, irrational woman? You underestimated me, Charles. Don't make that mistake again." She wheeled her suitcases past him, down the stairs, and toward the front door. Charles remained frozen at the top of the staircase, watching her go with a mixture of shock and dawning realization that he had lost control of the situation. At the door, Alexandra paused and looked back at the home she had loved, at the man she had once believed would be her partner for life. "My mother always told me that a woman's intuition never fails," she said softly. "I should have trusted mine sooner." With that, she walked out, closing the door firmly behind her. As she loaded her suitcases into her car, she felt something she hadn't expected. Not sorrow or anger, but a profound sense of liberation. For the first time in months, perhaps years, she was trusting herself completely. Her mind was clear, her path forward uncertain, but undeniably her own. As she drove away from the house and the shattered remains of her marriage, Alexandra felt a strange sense of gratitude toward the ant-attractant sitting in her glove compartment. Sometimes, it took something small and seemingly insignificant to bring down the most carefully constructed deceptions. And sometimes, the most effective revenge wasn't about causing pain, but about reclaiming your own power and walking away with your dignity intact. 3 weeks later, Alexandra sat in a sunlit corner of her new apartment, surrounded by potted plants that had made the journey with her from the house she'd shared with Charles. The space was smaller but filled with light, a one-bedroom unit in a modern building downtown, close to the Botanical Research Center where she worked. It had been a whirlwind of changes, but each day brought a renewed sense of independence. The divorce proceedings had begun more smoothly than she'd anticipated. Charles, despite his initial threats, had agreed to a relatively equitable division of assets after their first mediation session. Whether it was her bluff about the communications or simply the realization that fighting would only prolong the inevitable, he'd become surprisingly cooperative. They would sell the house and split the proceeds, divide their savings, and go their separate ways with minimal legal entanglement. Alexandra's phone chimed with a text message. It was from her colleague, Diane, checking if they were still on for dinner that evening. Alexandra confirmed, grateful for the friendships that had sustained her through the upheaval. She had been surprised by how many people rallied around her once she shared what had happened. Not the full details, but enough for them to understand she'd been betrayed in a fundamental way. As she set her phone down, Alexandra's gaze fell on the small business card propped against her desk lamp. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, therapist. She'd been seeing Rebecca twice weekly since leaving Charles, working through the complicated emotions that came with the end of her marriage. The gaslighting had left deeper scars than the infidelity itself, wounds to her sense of reality and self-trust that needed careful healing. The goal isn't to never be hurt again, Rebecca had told her in their last session. It's to trust yourself enough to know when something isn't right, and to honor that knowledge. Alexandra had been doing precisely that, learning to honor her intuition again, to rebuild her relationship with her own perceptions. The process was challenging but liberating. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Alexandra wasn't expecting visitors, and for a moment, anxiety fluttered in her chest. Was it Charles? He knew her address from the legal paperwork, though he'd never come by before. She approached the door cautiously and peered through the peephole. It wasn't Charles standing in the hallway, but Frank. Alexandra hesitated before opening the door. She hadn't spoken to Frank since that day at Riverside Cafe when he'd revealed Charles's affair. In the chaos of leaving and establishing her new life, she'd almost forgotten about his role in her awakening. "Frank," she said as she opened the door, "this is unexpected." He stood awkwardly in the hallway, hands shoved in his jacket pockets. "Hey, Alex. I hope it's okay that I stopped by. Charles mentioned your new address during one of his rants." Alexandra stepped back, gesturing for him to enter. "Come in. Can I get you something to drink? Water? Coffee?" "Coffee would be great, if it's not too much trouble," Frank replied, following her inside and looking around with obvious curiosity. "Nice place. It suits you." "Thanks," Alexandra said, moving to the small kitchen area to prepare the coffee. "It's still a work in progress, but it feels like mine." Frank settled onto one of the bar stools at her kitchen counter. That's what matters. They fell into silence as Alexandra measured coffee grounds and filled the machine with water. The quiet hum of the coffee maker provided a backdrop to the unspoken questions hanging between them. "So," Alexandra finally said, leaning against the counter as she waited for the coffee to brew, "what brings you by?" Frank ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she'd noticed over the years. "I wanted to check on you, see how you're doing with everything." "I'm doing better than I expected," she admitted, "taking it one day at a time." "That's good," Frank nodded. "And I also wanted to apologize." Alexandra raised an eyebrow. "For what? You told me the truth, when no one else would. If anything, I owe you thanks." "Maybe," Frank acknowledged, "but I knew for weeks before I said anything. I watched you suffering, questioning yourself, while I stayed silent because of some misguided loyalty to Charles." The coffee maker beeped, and Alexandra turned to pour 2 cups, using the moment to gather her thoughts. "You did eventually tell me," she said, sliding a mug toward him. "That's what matters." Frank accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. "Charles isn't speaking to me anymore. He knows it was me who told you." "I never said it was you." Alexandra frowned. "You didn't have to. There were only 3 people who knew about him and Tiffany. Charles, Tiffany, and me. Process of elimination." He took a sip of his coffee. "He came to my apartment the night you left. I've never seen him so angry. Alexandra felt a twinge of guilt. I'm sorry. I know he was your friend for a long time. Don't apologize, Frank said firmly. He made his choices. We both did. And frankly, I'm not sure our friendship was ever as genuine as I thought. What do you mean? Frank stared into his coffee mug, as if searching for the right words. The more I've reflected on things, the more I've realized Charles has always been selective with his loyalty. He's charming and confident, which makes people want to be around him, but he's always putting himself first. I just never wanted to see it before. Alexandra understood that feeling all too well, the reluctance to see the truth about someone you cared for. How did you know? She asked suddenly. About Tiffany, I mean. You said you suspected something before you saw them at the hotel. Frank grimaced. Remember that business conference in Phoenix 3 months ago? Charles told you he was going alone, but Tiffany was there too. I saw them together at the airport when I was picking up my sister. They didn't see me, but it was intimate, the way they were with each other. And you didn't say anything then, Alexandra said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. No, Frank admitted. Charles had been my friend since college. I told myself it might be innocent, that I was jumping to conclusions. Then I started noticing other things, how he'd check his phone constantly when we were out for drinks, how he'd step away to take calls, little things that added up. Alexandra nodded slowly. The same things I was noticing. The night I saw them at the Westbrook, I couldn't deny it anymore. Frank continued. Charles came to my place the next morning, like I told you. He admitted everything but swore it was just physical, that he still loved you. He begged me not to tell you. But you did, Alexandra said softly. It took me a few days to work up the courage, Frank confessed. I kept thinking about how he'd been treating you, making you doubt yourself, calling you paranoid. My sister went through something similar with her ex-husband. By the time she left him, she barely trusted her own perceptions anymore. I couldn't watch that happen to you. Alexandra felt a rush of gratitude toward this man who had risked a decades-long friendship to do what was right. Thank you, Frank. Truly. He shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. No, Alexandra said firmly. They wouldn't have. Many people would have minded their own business, stayed out of it. You chose to get involved, knowing you'd likely lose Charles's friendship. That took courage. Frank's cheeks reddened slightly at her praise. How are you really doing, Alex? Beyond the polite answer, Alexandra considered the question, appreciating his desire for honesty. Some days are harder than others. I'm angry at Charles, but also at myself for not trusting my instincts sooner. I'm sad about what I thought we had. But mostly, I'm relieved. There's something freeing about finally knowing the truth, even when it's painful. I can understand that. Frank nodded. And what about... He hesitated. What about what? The future, he said carefully. Are you thinking about dating again? Alexandra laughed, the sound surprising both of them. Honestly, that's the furthest thing from my mind right now. I'm focusing on rebuilding my relationship with myself first, learning to trust my intuition again. The rest can wait. Relief flickered across Frank's face, so quickly she almost missed it. That makes sense. You need time. They sipped their coffee in companionable silence for a few moments before Frank spoke again. Have you heard about Tiffany? Alexandra shook her head. I've made a point of not asking about either of them. Charles ended things with her the day after you left, Frank said. At least that's what I heard through mutual acquaintances. Apparently, he blamed her for the collapse of his marriage. Alexandra snorted. Of course he did. Heaven forbid Charles should take responsibility for his own actions. Exactly, Frank agreed. Always someone else's fault. A question that had been lingering in Alexandra's mind finally found its way to her lips. Why did you really come here today, Frank? He looked startled by her directness. I told you. To check on you. To apologize. There's more to it than that, she pressed gently. I can sense it. Frank set his coffee mug down, a wry smile crossing his face. There's that intuition of yours. You're right, of course. He took a deep breath. I was worried that you might think I had ulterior motives for telling you about Charles and Tiffany, that I might have wanted something in return. Understanding dawned on Alexandra. You thought I might believe you told me so you could… What? Swoop in after my marriage ended? Frank nodded, looking embarrassed. It sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud, but Charles suggested as much when he came to my apartment that night, said I'd always had feelings for you, that I was trying to sabotage his marriage to get to you. Alexandra felt a surge of indignation at Charles's manipulation. Even now, he was trying to twist the narrative, to undermine the one person who had been honest with her. That's not why you told me, she stated with certainty. No, Frank confirmed. It wasn't. I told you because it was the right thing to do, because you deserved to know the truth. I believe you, Alexandra said simply. Frank's shoulders relaxed visibly at her words. Thank you. That means a lot. Is that why you asked about me dating again? She inquired, raising an eyebrow. Frank's cheeks colored again. Partly. I wanted to make it clear that I'm not here with any expectations. The last thing you need right now is another complication in your life. Alexandra appreciated his honesty and consideration. You're a good friend, Frank. One I'd like to keep, if that's okay with you. I'd like that too, he said with a genuine smile. And for what it's worth, I think you're handling all of this with remarkable grace. Most people would have crumbled under the pressure. I came close, Alexandra admitted. There were moments when I truly believed I was losing my mind, when I thought maybe I was the problem. That's what makes what Charles did so insidious, Frank said quietly. It wasn't just the cheating. It was the way he made you question your own reality. Alexandra nodded, a lump forming in her throat. The worst part was that I started to believe him. I began to think that maybe I was being paranoid, that my suspicions were irrational. If you hadn't shown me that photo, you would have figured it out eventually, Frank assured her. Your intuition was too strong to be suppressed forever. Maybe, Alexandra conceded, but your intervention gave me back months, maybe years of my life. Time I might have spent trapped in doubt and confusion. Frank checked his watch and stood up. I should get going. I've taken up enough of your evening. You're welcome here any time, Alexandra said, walking him to the door. And Frank, thank you again. Not just for telling me the truth, but for checking on me now. It means more than you know. As she closed the door behind him, Alexandra felt a curious sense of closure. The conversation with Frank had helped her put to rest some lingering questions, some nagging doubts about that pivotal moment when her life had changed direction. She returned to her plants, gently touching a leaf of her favorite orchid, the one that had started to wilt in her kitchen all those weeks ago. It was thriving now in its new environment, putting out new growth and even a promising flower spike. Plants were resilient that way. Given the right conditions, they could recover from almost anything. Alexandra was beginning to believe that people could too. 6 months had passed since Alexandra Fleming had walked out of her marriage and into a new chapter of her life. Autumn had given way to winter, winter to spring, and now the first warmth of early summer filled the air with possibility. Her apartment had transformed from a temporary shelter into a true home, each corner reflecting her personality in a way her former house never quite had. Plants thrived on every windowsill. Herbs crowded her kitchen counter, and the small balcony had become a miniature oasis of greenery in the heart of the city. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago, faster than expected, thanks to Charles's unexpected cooperation. Perhaps he'd realized the futility of fighting, or maybe he was simply eager to move on with his life. Whatever his reasons, Alexandra was grateful for the relatively painless legal process. The house had sold quickly, the assets had been divided equitably, and she'd received her settlement check without drama or delay. Today marked another milestone, her 40th birthday. Alexandra had woken feeling not older, but more herself than ever before. She'd taken the day off work to celebrate in her own quiet way, starting with coffee on her balcony as she watched the sunrise paint the sky in delicate pinks and golds. Her phone chimed with a birthday text from her mother, followed by messages from friends and colleagues as the morning progressed. She smiled at each notification, touched by the outpouring of warmth. These connections had sustained her through the darkest days of her transformation. Around noon, Alexandra was repotting a particularly vibrant peace lily when her doorbell rang. She wiped her soil-covered hands on her gardening apron and went to answer it. A delivery person stood in the hallway with a stunning arrangement of flowers. Not the typical roses or lilies of standard bouquets, but a carefully curated selection of native wildflowers and unusual botanicals that only a true plant lover would appreciate. "Alexandra Fleming?" the delivery person confirmed. "That's me," she nodded, accepting the arrangement with appreciation for its unique beauty. Back inside, she set the flowers on her dining table and searched for the card nestled among the blooms. The message was simple, but meaningful. To new growth and stronger roots. "Happy birthday, Frank." Alexandra smiled, touched by his thoughtfulness and the perfect metaphor. Their friendship had deepened over the past months, evolving into something valuable and authentic. They met for coffee every couple of weeks, occasionally joined by mutual friends for dinner or a movie. Frank had been careful to maintain appropriate boundaries, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, respecting her need for independence and healing. Later that afternoon, Alexandra arrived at the Botanical Garden Research Center, where she had recently accepted a promotion to lead researcher in the Sustainable Agriculture Department. The position had come as a surprise. She hadn't even applied for it, but the director had sought her out specifically, impressed by her innovative work with natural pest deterrence and soil enrichment techniques. The anti-attractant project alone deserved recognition, he'd told her during their meeting. "Your application of pheromone science to sustainable farming practices could revolutionize how we protect crops." The irony wasn't lost on her. The same compound she'd used to expose Charles's deception had become the cornerstone of her professional advancement. Life had a curious way of creating purpose from pain. Today, she wasn't at the center to work, but to finalize preparations for tomorrow's symposium, where she would be presenting her research to an international audience of agricultural scientists and environmental policymakers. The conference room was already set up with rows of chairs facing the podium where she would stand. The thought sent a flutter of nerves through her stomach, but beneath the anxiety was a current of excitement. This was her moment to share her passion with people who might help implement her ideas on a global scale. "There you are!" Diane's voice called from the doorway. Her colleague and friend crossed the room with a gift bag dangling from her fingers. "Happy birthday! I thought I'd find you here instead of enjoying your day off like a normal person." Alexandra laughed. "I'm just doing a final check on everything. You know me, I can't leave anything to chance. Hence why you're the new department head, and the rest of us are still minions," Diane teased, handing her the gift. "Open it. It's partially selfish since I couldn't wait to see your face." Alexandra pulled out a beautiful leather-bound journal, the cover embossed with intricate botanical illustrations. When she opened it, she found the first page already contained an inscription, "For Dr. Alexandra Fleming, whose intuition and intelligence continue to change our world for the better. May this journal record the next chapter of your brilliant journey." It was signed by everyone in her department. "This is—" Alexandra trailed off, genuinely moved. "Thank you, Diane. And everyone. This means so much to me." "We're the ones who should be thanking you," Diane replied. "Your work is putting our center on the map. And besides," she added with a knowing smile, "we've all noticed how you've blossomed since your divorce. It's like watching someone step into the sunlight after being in shadow for years." Alexandra considered her friend's observation. There was truth in it. The end of her marriage, painful as it had been, had freed her in ways she was still discovering. Her confidence had returned, not just professionally, but personally, she trusted her instincts again, both in the lab and in life. Speaking of blossoming, Diane continued, a hint of mischief in her tone, what's the story with you and Frank? Half the department is convinced you're secretly dating. Alexandra rolled her eyes. We're friends, Diane. Just friends. If you say so, Diane replied skeptically. But he looks at you like you hung the moon. And don't think I haven't noticed how you light up when he comes around. It's complicated, Alexandra admitted. He was Charles's best friend for over 20 years. There's history there that can't be ignored. History. Schmistery. Diane waved dismissively. The man chose to do the right thing when it counted. That says more about his character than any past friendship. Alexandra couldn't argue with that assessment. Frank's decision to tell her the truth had revealed his true nature, his moral compass, and courage. In the months since, she'd come to value his friendship deeply, his dry humor, his thoughtfulness, his genuine interest in her work and well-being. And yes, perhaps there were moments when she'd wondered if there might be potential for something more. But she wasn't ready. Not yet. One step at a time, she told Diane firmly. I'm still figuring out who I am without Charles. The last thing I need is to jump into another relationship before I've fully found myself again. Fair enough, Diane conceded, but promise me you'll at least keep an open mind? Good men like Frank don't come along every day. I promise, Alexandra said, if only to change the subject. Now, help me double-check these presentation slides before I drive myself crazy, second-guessing everything. They spent the next hour reviewing her materials for the symposium, Diane offering valuable feedback and encouragement. By the time they finished, Alexandra felt confident and prepared for tomorrow's presentation. Dinner at Morgan's at 7, Diane reminded her, as they parted ways in the parking lot. Don't be late for your own birthday celebration. I wouldn't dare, Alexandra promised. Instead of heading directly home, she drove to the city park where she often went to think. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grass as she followed the winding path to her favorite bench overlooking the duck pond. She sat down, breathing in the scent of freshly mown grass and blooming honeysuckle. 40 years old, a new decade, a new beginning. She had never imagined she would be starting over at this point in her life, and yet here she was, not just surviving, but thriving. The pain of Charles's betrayal had diminished to a dull ache that occasionally resurfaced in quiet moments, but it no longer defined her. It had become merely one chapter in her story, not the whole book. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Frank, hope the flowers weren't too much. Happy birthday again. See you tonight at Morgan's? Alexandra smiled, typing her reply. The flowers are perfect. Thank you. And yes, I'll see you tonight. She slipped the phone back into her pocket, her thoughts turning to Frank. Diane wasn't entirely wrong. There was something there, a potential that had been growing quietly between them. But Alexandra wasn't willing to rush into anything, not when she was still discovering who she was on her own terms. The therapy sessions with Dr. Martinez had helped her understand that the greatest betrayal in her marriage hadn't been Charles's infidelity, but the way he'd systematically undermined her trust in herself. Rebuilding that trust was an ongoing process, one that required patience and self-compassion. Your intuition is a gift, Dr. Martinez had told her in their final session. It's your inner wisdom speaking to you. The challenge now is learning to listen to it again, without the interference of doubt or fear. Alexandra had been practicing exactly that, listening to her intuition, honoring it, following where it led. It had guided her through the end of her marriage, through the rebuilding of her life, and now it was guiding her toward new possibilities, both professionally and personally. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the pond, Alexandra stood and began walking back to her car. It was time to get ready for her birthday dinner with friends. Time to celebrate not just another year of life, but the woman she had become. Stronger, wiser, more authentically herself than ever before. Morgan's was bustling when she arrived that evening, the upscale restaurant filled with the pleasant hum of conversation and clinking glasses. Diane had reserved a private room in the back, where a group of 15 or so friends and colleagues were already gathered. A cheer went up as Alexandra entered, and she found herself enveloped in hugs and well wishes. Frank stood slightly apart from the group, watching her with a warm smile. He'd dressed up for the occasion, a navy blazer over a crisp white shirt, his usually tousled hair neatly combed. When their eyes met across the room, something unspoken passed between them. Appreciation, affection, possibility. "Happy birthday," he said, when she finally made her way to him. "40 looks good on you." "Ah, thank you," she replied, accepting the compliment with a confidence she wouldn't have possessed a year ago. "For everything, not just the flowers or being here tonight, but for all of it. For telling me the truth when it would have been easier to stay silent. For checking on me when I was at my lowest. For being a true friend when I needed one most." Frank's expression softened. "You make it sound like some noble sacrifice. The truth is, I've gotten as much from our friendship as you have. More, probably." Before she could respond, Diane called for everyone's attention, raising her glass in a toast to Alexandra. The room quieted as their friend spoke eloquently about Alexandra's brilliance, resilience, and kindness. Others joined in, adding their own tributes and memories, until Alexandra felt nearly overwhelmed by the outpouring of affection. When the toasts concluded and dinner was served, she found herself seated beside Frank, their conversation flowing easily from work to books to future plans. There was no awkwardness, no pressure, just the comfortable rapport they'd developed over months of healing and growth. "I've been meaning to ask you something," Frank said as they shared a dessert, a decadent chocolate cake that the restaurant was famous for. "Would you be interested in collaborating on the community garden project I mentioned? The one for the children's hospital?" Alexandra's interest was immediately piqued. Frank had spoken before about his volunteer work designing therapeutic green spaces, but this was the first time he'd suggested they work together. "I'd love to," she replied without hesitation. "What did you have in mind?" As he outlined his vision for a garden that would help children heal through interaction with nature, Alexandra felt a familiar spark of excitement. This was exactly the kind of meaningful work she'd always wanted to do, combining her botanical expertise with tangible human impact. "We could start planning next week, if you're not too busy with the symposium fallout," Frank suggested. "Maybe over dinner?" There was a slight hesitation in his voice, a careful testing of boundaries that Alexandra found both respectful and endearing. "Dinner would be perfect," she agreed, making a decision that felt right in every way. Not a rush toward something new, but a natural progression of what was already growing between them. Later, as the party wound down and guests began to depart, Frank walked her to her car in the restaurant's parking lot. The night was warm, stars visible despite the city lights, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of nearby flowering trees. "Thank you for coming tonight," Alexandra said as they reached her vehicle. "It meant a lot to have you here." "I wouldn't have missed it," Frank replied. He hesitated, then added, "You know, when I first told you about Charles and Tiffany, I never imagined we'd end up here. Friends, I mean. Life rarely goes according to plan," Alexandra observed with a small smile. "Sometimes that's for the best." Frank nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking a lot about intuition lately, about how you knew something was wrong in your marriage long before you had any evidence. How you sensed the truth beneath all the deception." "It took me too long to trust what I was feeling," Alexandra admitted. "That's the lesson I'm trying not to forget, to listen to that inner voice, even when everyone else is telling me I'm wrong." "What is that voice telling you now?" Frank asked softly. Alexandra looked at him, really looked at him, taking in the gentle intelligence in his eyes, the quiet strength in his bearing, the genuine care he'd consistently shown her. Her intuition spoke clearly. without the interference of doubt or fear that had clouded it for so long. "It's telling me that some endings are really beginnings in disguise," she said. "That trust, once broken, can be rebuilt stronger than before. That the right people come into our lives exactly when we need them, sometimes in the most unexpected ways." Frank's smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. "That's quite a profound inner voice you've got there." Alexandra laughed. "It's been through a lot. We both have." "To new beginnings, then," Frank said, not pushing for more, respecting the pace she needed to set. "To new beginnings," she agreed. As she drove home, beneath the canopy of stars, Alexandra felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The path forward wasn't entirely clear, and that was okay. She had learned to trust the journey, to believe in her own wisdom, to recognize truth when she encountered it. Her 41st year was just beginning, full of promise and possibility. She had her work, her friends, her newfound confidence, and perhaps, when the time was right, something beautiful with Frank. But most importantly, she had herself, whole and healing, intuitive and strong, no longer doubting the wisdom of her own heart. Alexandra smiled as she navigated the familiar streets toward home. A woman's intuition never fails, her mother had always said. And now, after everything, Alexandra knew just how right she had been. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.